If you haven't already checked out part 1 of the reflector type in human design, you can do that now. But if not, let's get started and talk about the reflector type in human design and their unique strategy that is based on the transits of the moon. In part 1, we talked about what a reflector was and how all reflectors have all open centers and no definition at all. We also mentioned the theme of disappointment and that reflectors are here to be barometers of the health of a community. That energetically they can feel the auras of all the other human design types and also how they need alone time and a stable community. Now let's talk about the human design strategy for a reflector type. And what is your human design strategy? Strategy comes from your type, and it's the most important knowledge offered by human design. It gives information about how to operate in the world, it aids you in making the right decisions for yourself, and it also helps in recognizing when you're on the right path in your life. If there's anything that's true about human design, is that even Ra Uru, who would be considered the father of human design and the human design system, always said that what we're supposed to do with human design is experiment with what works. Because just like anything else in life, there is no one size that fits all. So to find out what's best for us, we need to experiment. So if you're interested in experimenting and finding out more about the strategy for a reflector, then you can keep listening as we find out more about the strategy for a reflector in human design. The one thing that's the same for all human design types except for the manifestor is that there is a waiting period, and the reflector has the longest waiting period of all. Because based on their human design strategy, they need to wait for a full lunar cycle to make any big decisions in their lives. Reflectors are considered lunar beings, or people who are deeply impacted by the movement and cycles of the moon. Because in a 29-day cycle, the moon will transit each of the 64 gates of the human design mandala. And based on the placement of the moon each day, the chart of a reflector can change dramatically. So how does this work? So if we look at the chart of Teal Swan, who is a writer and public speaker on spirituality, psychology, and metaphysics, we can see that she's a reflector because we know that as a reflector, all centers will be open with no defined centers. We can also see that her body graph is specific to her based on the time of birth, the day of birth, and the place of birth. And what that means is that she has defined gates. And if we know that all gates have a matching partner to make a complete channel, then we know that there are certain gates that, if activated by the moon's transits, will give her definition in her chart. The moon goes through 64 gates in a 29-day period, so that means the moon is in one gate roughly 10 hours for each 29-day cycle. And because of this, the definition that a reflector has is very transient. And one more thing about a reflector's cycle and the 29-day transit and waiting for clarity on big opportunities, the cycle can begin the first day that the opportunity is presented to the reflector, or as soon as they know that they want to do something. Then they can start their 29-day cycle and then cycle through all the different gates, and then they can find the clarity that they need. So that means that they could be starting at different times when the moon is in different parts of the mandala, but it doesn't really matter as long as they make a complete circle and transit through all the different gates, and they know afterwards about the clarity of the decision if it's good or not for them. So if we look at the human design mandala, something that we normally don't look at when we're looking at a body graph, because it can make it complicated to understand a body graph when you're first learning, we can see that there are 3 different circles going around the mandala. Now, the only one that actually matters in human design is the one that has the numbers, and that is referring to the gates of human design. For anybody who has an astrological background, you'll notice the glyphs of the zodiac are also on the circle around the mandala. And if someone has a background in the I Ching, you'll notice that the hexagrams are on the outside of the circle. But for the purposes of the transits of the moon in human design, as I just said, we'll just be looking at the gates, and that the moon will transit or pass over a specific gate for about 10 hours for each cycle of the 29 days. And when it does, the transits will affect the definition in the reflector's chart. So what does that look like? So if we look here, we have the astrological transits of the planets. The moon is represented by a little crescent, as you can see there, and the gates that are being transited by the moon are circled. So if you notice, for the first picture, it says the gate 22 is being transited. Now there's a number right beside the number 22, so it would say 22.5. For now, just ignore that second number. Just look at the first number and see that that's the gate. And then the next gate to the right would be the 55. Then you go down to the 41, and then it goes on to all different transits until it goes completely around the mandala. And because the moon is predictable in its orbit around the mandala and hits all the gates in the same order, once a reflector knows what gates will affect them, then they can pretty much time when they will feel the energy of the definition. It will take time to figure out, and there is software that can help you with this, but it usually comes in a bigger program that is not really necessary for an average person studying human design. Alternately, if someone is a reflector or you know somebody who's a reflector and you want to know the transits, you can also get the Human Design app. All the transits that I have here are from the Human Design app. So what you could do is just slowly go through every transit and how it goes through the reflector's chart. So let's see how that looks in practice. So if we look at the transits of March 25th at 8:29 a.m., you'll notice that the moon is in gate 34. Now, gate 34 will impact Teal Swan's chart because she has a gate 10. And together that would make up the channel 3410. And it will also give definition to the identity center and also the sacral center. So by having the sacral center defined for that time, she might be able to actually get more done in the day because she has the energy of a defined sacral for at least 10 hours based on whenever it starts. The transit also defines the identity, but usually the defined sacral will have a bigger impact than the defined identity in an actual physical manifestation. So if we look at the next day on March 26th at 5:29, we can see that the gate 26 is being transited by the moon. And the gate 26 will give her definition as well. It will define her spleen as well as the will center. And when her spleen is defined, it can give her a sense of timing, but it can also give her a sense of her health because the spleen is about health. So she could check in on her health when this transit happens and when the energy is less fluid. And it also gives willpower. So on these days, she might be more stubborn and resistant to things not going her way. And the way her definition comes into the will center is from the 4426, which is all about the sale and preparing for the sale. So this would be when she might have more persuasion for a sales energy. So there definitely is a benefit to knowing the transits of your chart as a reflector, because what it will do is give a heads up on energies that are going to be prevalent in you on certain days, times, as the months go on. And the more familiar a reflector is with these energies, the better they'll be able to manage them. Now that we know the transits of the moon, how does that work in the strategy of a reflector? So if we're still using Teal Swan as an example, and she's been given an opportunity to do a public speaking event, and in that moment, it feels like it's a good thing for her, but a couple transits later of the moon, and it doesn't feel so good. So the concept of going through the whole 29 days is that she will go through all the definition that she gets through her body graph based on the transits of the moon. And with all the definition that she gets, she'll decide if that opportunity is something that she wants to do. In other words, if it feels good to her for the whole 29-day cycle and that she continues to want to do it, then that would be a good decision for her and she can go ahead and do it. But if at some point during her 29-day cycle it doesn't feel as good, then that would be an indication that maybe it's not the right opportunity for her. It's very similar to an emotional wave in that she's feeling her way through it, but it's not just the emotional wave. It's all the different centers that are going to be defined based on her body graph. And based on her body graph, all centers will be defined except for the head center from the transits of the moon. So yes, it is a complicated strategy for a reflector, and also one that can be a little bit tough to maneuver in the world that we live in because nobody wants anybody to take that much time to make a decision. And so it can happen that a reflector will make a decision that they don't feel comfortable with or they're not as happy with after the fact, but they're tied into it and they can't really get out of it. So although the strategy for a reflector is to wait the 29-day cycle, they have to do what feels right for them. And that's where the experimenting comes into play, and they can experiment with how it fits into their life. But if there's anything that they can get out of the 29-day cycle, is how their energy works and how they can make it work the best for them. So it's really beneficial for a reflector to know their 29-day cycle. So, for instance, if we look at the chart of Margaret Atwood, a writer, the definition in the gate 30 will match up with the gate 41 at some point during her 29-day cycle. Now, the gate 41 is all about fantasy, and the 30 is putting it all into play or holding on to an idea and actually being able to write it down. So, when the 41 is transiting in her 29-day cycle, that might be a good time for her to do her writing. And also, she has a gate 56, which is also the gate of the storyteller. So another time when it would be a good time for her to possibly write would be when the gate 11 is being transited by the moon. And that way she can take the ideas from her ajna and bring them together with the 56, which is to the throat. So then she can start to manifest the stories that she has in her head. Of course, there's much more to say about her chart and how the transits might affect her, but for now, seeing the transits in play is all we need to know. So you can see that a reflector's job in the community is extremely important and can really aid in identifying issues within a community. And when we know that there is incohesiveness in a group, then it's easier for us to identify the problems and to try and remedy them. By having a reflector's contribution, life gets better for both the reflector as well as their community. But this can only happen if a reflector knows her energy and is able to use it in the best way possible. And it can only happen when they are given the time to understand themselves. And when they do, the benefits are immeasurable. Knowing your type is just the beginning of the information that the body graph will show you. But I'm going to stop here for now and let you digest what I've talked about. And make sure to check out my other videos where you can learn more and more information about human design and the body graph and all about you. Because when we truly know who we are, life just gets easier.